At 60 years old, Charlie Sheen has finally decided to reveal something he has never spoken of before. It's not a story of fame or scandal, but of quiet memories and relationships that left deep, lasting scars. In this video, I'll share with you 5 names, 5 colleagues from Blade Runner, whom Charlie Sheen could never truly call friends. A late-life confession, both painful and thought-provoking. Tom Berenger, the name that left Charlie Sheen with a scar that never healed. That pain is something many older viewers can relate to. Giving your best yet never being recognized, having your voice cut off mid-sentence, feeling like you'll always be on the sidelines. So when Charlie mentioned Tom Berenger, audiences didn't see it as harsh criticism, but as a sincere human confession. For the public, Tom Berenger remains a legend. But in Charlie's private story, Tom stands as the symbol of a quiet, hurt the pain of being disrespected under the mask of camaraderie. By speaking out, Charlie turned that pain into a gentle but powerful reminder. Always listen, always respect those walking beside you, because their silence may be hiding more wounds than you realize. In the memories of many movie lovers, Tom Berenger is unforgettable. He brought to life gritty, tough characters, leaving a strong impression in war dramas and psychological films. To the public, Tom was the man of steel type, stoic, rugged, with a presence that demanded respect. But for Charlie Sheen, who once worked closely with him on set, Tom's name carries a different weight, a silent, lingering wound, the feeling of being belittled and dismissed, one he could never forget. Charlie never denied Tom Berenger's talent. In fact, he openly praised Tom's ability to inhabit a role in many interviews. But talent and admiration didn't translate into respect behind the scenes. What haunted Charlie the most was the way Tom treated him during those tense days of filming. He always looked at me like I was just a rookie, even though I tried hard to prove I could stand as an equal, Charlie once admitted. The words sound soft, but behind them is the pain of an artist yearning to be recognized. On set, Tom had a habit Charlie could never forget. Whenever Charlie tried to analyze a scene or share ideas with the director and crew, Tom often cut him off, sometimes with a joke, other times with a dismissive shake of the head. To outsiders, it might have seemed like harmless banter from a senior actor. But to Charlie, they were small cuts that accumulated day after day, erasing his voice bit by bit. Once, during a scene that required delicate coordination, Charlie suggested an approach to add depth to the performance. Before he could finish, Tom interrupted with a half-joking remark, "Kid, just learn your lines. Leave the philosophy to the grown-ups." The crew laughed. Charlie laughed too, because that was expected. But inside, it stung. In that moment, he realized he wasn't being seen as a peer, but as a kid brother forever overshadowed by Tom's towering presence. What hurt Charlie most wasn't open conflict. It was the subtle condescension wrapped in friendliness. Tom never shouted or created explosive drama. Instead, it came through half-jokes, glances that implied, "You're not there yet." It was a form of quiet dismissal, too vague to challenge, but sharp enough to make one feel small. To the audience, Tom Berenger will always be a quintessential American actor, rugged, commanding, leader-like. But to Charlie, behind that exterior was a quiet indifference. He never needed Tom's praise or admiration. All he wanted was acknowledgement that his ideas had value, that he had the right to speak. Years later, long after leaving the set, Charlie finally named Tom among those who left him uneasy. Not to tear him down, not to spark controversy, but to unburden himself. He wanted people to understand that behind the glamorous spotlight of great films, actors also carry hidden wounds, bloodless scars that last a lifetime. Willem Dafoe, the shadow that made Charlie Sheen feel small. Unlike colleagues who dismissed him with jokes or condescension, Willem was a paradox. He never wronged Charlie. His excellence itself was the wound. Willem wasn't an adversary, nor was he unkind. He was simply a mountain too tall, and standing beside him made others feel diminished. For many viewers, Charlie's confession resonates deeply. We all have had a Willem Dafoe in our lives, someone so gifted, so radiant, they make us feel both admiration and inadequacy. And like Charlie, we don't resent them, we resent the way their brilliance erases us. In the end, Charlie's mention of Willem wasn't a complaint, but a release. It was his way of saying, "I once felt small, but I won't stay silent anymore. I acknowledge that feeling, and in doing so, I find peace." To the world, Willem Dafoe remains a cinematic icon. But in Charlie Sheen's private story, Willem is the mirror of a hidden pain, the pain of standing beside a star so bright that you spend a lifetime wondering if your own light will ever be seen. To global audiences, Willem Dafoe is one of Hollywood's most distinctive actors. His sharp features, piercing eyes, and half-alluring, half-haunting smile made him an unmistakable figure. To the public, Willem embodies fearless artistry. He can transform into a faithful priest, a ruthless villain, or a lost soul wandering between darkness and light. But for Charlie Sheen, Willem Dafoe was more than just a gifted colleague. He was an overwhelming shadow, a presence so immense it made Charlie feel small, no matter how hard he tried to rise. Charlie never denied Willem's natural talent. In fact, admiration was always clear in his voice whenever he spoke of him. Yet that admiration came hand in hand with a quiet inferiority complex. On set, Charlie often felt consumed by Willem's powerful energy. One memory stayed with him. For a psychologically heavy scene, Charlie prepared for days, studying every line, every glance, determined to capture the depth of the moment. But as soon as Willem entered, with one cold, intense look, the atmosphere shifted completely. The focus Charlie had built crumbled within seconds. He finished the scene, but carried a bitter disappointment, not because he was weak, but because he felt he could never grow big enough to exist beside that man. Charlie once confessed, "Standing next to Willem, I always felt like a clumsy student. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the sense of being under his shadow." That feeling is one many older viewers can relate to. Who hasn't experienced it, pouring your heart into something only for another's presence to eclipse all your effort? The irony was that Willem never tried to overshadow anyone. He never raised his voice, never belittled. He worked with professionalism and focus, yet that very intensity became its own pressure. Whenever Willem immersed himself in a role, the entire crew was swept into his orbit. Directors, actors, even stagehands leaned toward him. And in that pull, Charlie felt out of place, like a small instrument, struggling to be heard in a grand symphony. Some might say that's the price of sharing the stage with a genius. But for Charlie, the price wasn't just exhaustion. It was a wound that lingered long after filming ended. He carried with him the constant comparison, the sense of being a supporting piece in a play where Willem was always the star. He remembered one day, after a long scene, the director showered Willem with praise in front of everyone. Charlie too was acknowledged, but with only a passing remark, "Good job, Charlie." Compared to the applause Willem received, it felt like a crumb, small and forgettable. Charlie smiled and nodded, but inside he felt invisible. Keith David, the voice of authority that silenced Charlie Sheen. Charlie's unease with Keith was unlike the resentment he felt toward colleagues who mocked or dismissed him. Here, it was more of a quiet wound. Keith never wronged him, he was simply too powerful, too magnetic, and that made Charlie feel weaker than ever. In naming Keith David, Charlie wasn't diminishing him. Quite the opposite. It was an acknowledgement that Keith was so remarkable, his presence alone could unintentionally silence another. For Charlie, admitting this at 60 was a form of healing. He no longer held it as a bitter secret, but as a story, one that helps audiences understand the invisible struggles actors face behind the camera. To the world, Keith David remains the voice of authority, a versatile and beloved artist. But in Charlie Sheen's private story, Keith represents something quieter, the unsettling feeling of being overshadowed, of watching your own voice fade in the echo of another's. And when Charlie finally spoke his name, it wasn't in blame, it was in honesty, a deeply human confession. There are people in life who make us feel both admiration and pain, and from them, we learn that to survive, we must discover the strength of our own true voice. Among the many colleagues he worked with, Keith David left Charlie Sheen with one of the most complicated impressions, part admiration, part discomfort. To audiences, Keith is Hollywood's golden voice. His deep, resonant tone, rich and commanding like a brass instrument, captivated millions. Whether in action films, dramas, or even voice acting, Keith carried an authority that made people listen. But for Charlie, that very authority was a double-edged sword. It often left him feeling as though his own voice had been drowned out, erased as if it never existed. Charlie once admitted, "When Keith spoke, the whole room went silent. When I spoke, people listened for a moment, then drifted back to him." That feeling wasn't easy to swallow. His frustration never came from hostility. Keith never tried to overshadow him. Instead, Keith possessed a natural weight, a presence that filled the space without effort. Yet for Charlie, that presence built an invisible wall, making it hard for him to carve out a place for his own voice. One moment stands out in Charlie's memory. During a script discussion, he offered a small suggestion for improving a dialogue exchange. Keith didn't dismiss it. He simply repeated the same idea in his own voice, firm, resonant, commanding. The result? Everyone in the room nodded along with Keith, as if the thought had originated from him. Charlie smiled and stayed silent, but inside he felt crushed. His voice had been stolen not by argument, but by sheer dominance of tone. This happened again and again. In meetings, Charlie spoke less and less, knowing that as soon as Keith spoke, attention would shift. He didn't blame Keith after all, that magnetism was a gift. But Charlie felt the sting of unfairness. Why should the same idea sound like truth in Keith's mouth, but like an echo in his own? Older audiences might recognize themselves in this. In workplaces, families, or social groups, many have poured their hearts into speaking, only to be overshadowed not because others tried to silence them, but because someone's presence was simply too strong. Like Charlie, they felt both admiration and hurt. Charlie recalled that Keith was always professional, calm, and respectful. He wasn't the type to cut people off or belittle them. In fact, he often encouraged his peers with short but sincere compliments. Paradoxically, this kindness made Charlie even more conflicted. Behind Keith's supportive words, Charlie still heard his own inner voice whispering, "You're just his shadow." One day, during a group scene, Charlie stood beside Keith as the camera panned across the cast. Watching the playback, Charlie realized a painful truth. The audience's eyes went to Keith. No matter how carefully he crafted his expressions, no matter how hard he performed, Keith's commanding presence stole the frame. Charlie asked himself, was I born only to stand behind others? A backdrop for someone else's brilliance? Francesco Quinn, the silent rivalry that haunted Charlie Sheen for a lifetime. The answer was clear. Francesco embodied everything Charlie longed for, but never felt he possessed effortless recognition, natural admiration, and an aura that didn't need to be earned. When Francesco died suddenly at 48, Charlie remained silent. No public tributes, no grand gestures, but privately, he admitted, I was trapped in a race without a finish line. Then one day, my rival vanished, leaving me with an emptiness nothing could fill. It wasn't triumph he felt, but loss. Without Francesco, Charlie realized he had spent so long defining himself in comparison that he no longer knew what freedom looked like. Older audiences might recognize this truth. We aren't only wounded by cruelty, but sometimes by the quiet brilliance of those who outshine us. Good people, talented people, whose very existence forces us to see our own limits. For Charlie, Francesco was exactly that. Not an enemy, not a villain, but a rival who never declared war, yet left him carrying a wound for life. To the world, Francesco Quinn remains a gifted actor, a worthy son of Anthony Quinn. But in Charlie Sheen's private story, Francesco is a scar, both a friend and a rival, a figure of respect, shadowed by sorrow. By speaking his name at 60, Charlie freed himself. He no longer let the wound fester in silence, but turned it into a story so audiences could understand that even the brightest stars sometimes feel like shadows. Mention the name Francesco Quinn, and many viewers recall his rugged charm, those sorrowful eyes that seem to hide entire untold stories. As the son of legend Anthony Quinn, Francesco carried the weight and the glory of a towering legacy. To the public, he was both a worthy heir and a talent in his own right, never consumed by his father's shadow. But in Charlie Sheen's eyes, Francesco was more than a colleague. He was an invisible rival, a constant reminder of comparison, and ultimately, the feeling of being left behind. Charlie once confessed, "Francesco didn't have to try too hard. Just by walking into a room, the attention shifted to him. For me, I had to fight for every ounce of recognition." The bitterness in those words reveals a wound that lingered with him for years. What troubled Charlie wasn't open conflict, but the unspoken rivalry that followed them everywhere. Directors, castmates, even the press seemed to pit them against each other. Who shines brighter? Who wins the audience's heart? For Charlie, it was a silent, grueling race, one he often felt he had lost before it began. He remembered one audition vividly. He poured every ounce of effort into a tense dialogue, using his voice and gaze to convey weight. He felt proud of his work until Francesco stepped in. With just a well-timed pause, a fleeting glance, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The director nodded in approval. Colleagues whispered praises. Charlie smiled politely, but inside, turmoil raged. He realized that talent wasn't only hard work, it was also something innate, something he could never quite reach. The press comparisons deepened the wound. One article praised Francesco's depth. Another described Charlie as flashy but shallow. To the world, Francesco was the true artist, while Charlie seemed like the lucky star riding on fleeting fame. Those words widened the gap, reinforcing Charlie's sense of inferiority. And yet Charlie could never truly dislike Francesco. Offset, Francesco was warm, kind, even encouraging. He often checked in, offered support, lifted Charlie up when he felt low. But that kindness only made the rivalry more painful. Charlie asked himself, "Why do I resent someone who has done nothing wrong? Why do his compliments make me feel even smaller?" Forest Whitaker, the silence that made Charlie Sheen feel invisible. Years later, with his career behind him, Charlie spoke of Forrest with more peace. "Maybe it wasn't Forrest," he admitted. "Maybe it was me, a man so desperate for attention that even someone's quietness felt like rejection." By naming Forrest at 60, Charlie wasn't just exposing a truth, he was confessing to himself. He was once the young man who couldn't bear silence. Now, by speaking it aloud, he seemed to find release at last. If Tom Berenger brought fear, Willem Dafoe left guilt, Keith David etched conflict, and Francesco Quinn became the haunting shadow of comparison, then Forest Whitaker represented something entirely different. Silence. A gentle distance that, paradoxically, made Charlie Sheen feel abandoned within his own circle. With his calm demeanor and soulful gaze, Forrest carried himself on set more like an observer than a contender. He never raised his voice to prove his worth. His silence carried more weight than the loudest dialogue. That quiet strength left Charlie both in awe and unsettled, like every effort he made was swallowed by the stillness Forrest brought with him. Charlie once admitted, "After a scene, I'd wait for a nod, a word, any sign of acknowledgement. But Forrest just sat there, silent, as if I didn't exist." It wasn't loud rejection, it was something worse, the gnawing doubt of whether he belonged at all. Of course, Forrest never intended to make Charlie feel that way. His nature was inward, restrained, thoughtful. He treated everyone equally, no favoritism, no contempt. But in an environment fueled by tension and ego, his quietness became a mirror, reflecting Charlie's deepest insecurities back at him. Charlie recalled one night on set. Exhausted, smoking, waiting for his turn, he looked over at Forrest, sitting alone in the corner, eyes closed, as if listening to something far away. Charlie tried starting a conversation. Forrest responded politely, briefly, and then let the silence close in again. The exchange ended so quickly that Charlie felt shut out of a world he couldn't enter. Later, he confessed, "I wasn't angry with him, but his silence made me feel small, like I didn't matter." For Charlie, Forrest embodied the kind of man he could never be respected without effort, memorable without noise. While Charlie had to constantly explode with energy just to be noticed, Forrest could command attention by simply existing. That stark contrast built an invisible wall between them. So when Charlie eventually listed Forrest Whitaker among the 5 actors I hated most, it wasn't hate in the usual sense. It was hurt born from feeling unseen. To Charlie, being looked down on might have been easier. At least contempt acknowledges your presence. But silence erased him. Many older audiences might recognize this pain. Sometimes we are not broken by harsh words, but by the absence of words. By the longing for recognition answered only with indifference. Forrest Whitaker, in Charlie's experience, embodied that beautiful, haunting silence. Today's story isn't meant to judge or reopen old grudges, but simply to share Charlie Sheen's late-in-life reflections. Behind the spotlight, every artist carries private struggles that only with age and perspective they find the courage to reveal. If you feel a connection to his words, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your support and sharing are the greatest encouragement for us to keep bringing heartfelt stories like this. Thank you so much.